Morning, folks. Hope all is going well. My name is Luke Miller. I'm a senior associate here on the policy and programs team at NEEP, and I am glad you're all with us here today on this webinar. We're going to talk about the IRA, data implementation, data access, and program implementation. Just a couple things before we get started. I want to let you all know that this webinar is being recorded, and we have closed captioning enabled as well. With the slides and the recording we'll share with all attendees, and we are going to keep everybody muted until we hit the Q&A section after myself and Samantha and Colleen present. And the chat will be available for comments the whole way through. If you have any questions that come up, pop them in there and we'll do our best to get to them in a timely manner. And then we have this antitrust statement on the bottom here as well. Just give that a quick read, and then we will be ready to rock. I want to thank our Allies Network for supporting NEEP. We have a couple of them with us hosting this panel here today, which is always nice. And I also want to thank our Funders Network, always helping us out, and our state partners as well. And one last plug before we start. We have our heating electrification workshop coming up next week. Get excited. It's in New Haven, Connecticut at the Hotel Marcel on the 24th and the 25th. So if you have not yet registered, please do it. All right. So with that, I will get us started. So yeah, we're unlocking the power of energy data. This is all about utility data access and the future of energy efficiency planning, with kind of looking towards the IRA and how we can implement, how we can use some of the requirements and funding from the IRA to spur the next era of energy efficiency planning and really strong energy efficiency programs. Next, please. All right. So the good use of existing energy data that we've got can enhance energy efficiency programs. This is a common concept. It's great to be able to have data that we can use in order to kind of make sure that everything is working the way that we intend. Good energy data can enhance equity outcomes as well. We can ensure that we're providing the support to customers that most need it, and we can inform and educate customers as to how they can change their behavior to maybe to kind of improve their own energy outcomes and spend less on energy purchases, decrease their energy burdens. And to kind of go along with this, the IRA funding requires states to submit their own data access plans. So it's a great time right now for states to be able to kind of get started with putting data access plans together so that they can bolster their existing energy efficiency programs that already exist and make them more effective into the future. Using IRA funding, states can kind of make proactive investments that will last into the future and lead to better informed and better executed decarbonization programs. Next up, please. So the DOE guidance on data access plans lists a whole lot of helpful information. There are some hard requirements, and then there are some suggestions. The key elements that they highlight the most are the security and safety of energy consumption data. And this is kind of where most of those hard requirements fall, is in that security and safety area. The consent, notification, and revocation process for customers to provide access to their own data, their usage data. Eligibility of third parties, given that there are going to be third-party contractors who are accessing the data. Data aggregation and anonymization, quality and accessibility of the data, ensuring that the data is reliable and that it's usable by third-party contractors, and then oversight and enforcement of anyone who is handling this data. So these are all the kind of guidelines, and I'll go through in a little bit more detail now. So the DOE requirements, as I mentioned, mainly discuss the security information. It's kind of all about encryption, secure access, guidelines for how to engage with the data, and then incident response protocols. All of this kind of dealing with ensuring that customers feel comfortable in providing their data to state energy offices and to third parties who are going to be using this data to do different things, to create new programs, to kind of bolster their existing energy efficiency programs. It's important to make sure that this data is being handled in a secure way, and there's not a risk of this data getting being handled improperly. One of the other important concepts kind of in the same vein is the customer consent process, and there needs to be a kind of a step-by-step process in place where customers can give consent. The utility can notify customers that what their data is being used for, and customers have they're able to revoke access at some point if they feel they need to do so. And then the last hard requirement, is the disclosure of energy consumption data use as primary or secondary. Basically what a given party is using this data for. Primary kind of deals with legal functions like regulatory reporting, whereas secondary data use is more referring to outreach and education, where, if you can imagine on your utility bill, you see comparisons with your neighborhood kind of average energy usage or something along those lines. So those are the requirements. And then there are a bunch of other kind of suggestions and helpful tips that enable you to kind of enhance how data is used. One of these is third-party engagement with customer data. The DOE recommends that it's helpful to kind of outline requirements and oversight of any parties that are handling customer data. They list a couple of different existing protocols that are in use. There's this 2015 voluntary code of conduct that they published, and then existing eligibility criteria from utilities or regulators or other state programs. We've got a couple examples on this slide here. And then there's also a process by which states should choose which authority is overseeing third-party implementers, just to make sure that there is oversight and that that customers are feeling secure that there's some kind of process for overseeing the parties that are engaging with their data. All right, so I'll wrap this up real quick so that we can get on to our next speakers. But broadly, the takeaways that we would like to highlight is that it would be really helpful to form a data access working group. Data access and security are complex issues, and they're going to involve a lot of coordination. You've got to engage utilities, third-party implementers, and a lot of other stakeholders. So it's important to kind of get everybody involved early on in the process. You've got to develop secure data protection and access protocols. As I mentioned, those are kind of the hardest requirements that the DOE lays out in their data access plans and in the guidance. Implementing benchmarking strategies, of course, going to be helpful for ensuring that data can be used and you can compare it to past data in order to kind of ensure strong energy efficiency program outcomes. Designing rules governing aggregation and anonymization is another good privacy practice. Aggregation and anonymization can kind of help along the lines of ensuring customers that their private usage data is not going out into the world and being, not something that can come back to them, can be used to identify anyone. And then outlining the customer consent notification and revocation process is another one of those protection and security protocols, and customers have to be informed as to, whether they want to be a part of the data sharing arrangement, and they can decide whether or not they would like to participate. All right, and with that, I will pass it on to Samantha. And Samantha, I'll let you give your intro and we can get going. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Luke. Hi, everyone. I'm Samantha Caputo. I am on OPower's Regulatory Affairs and Market Development team, and I cover the Northeast region. OPower is a part of Oracle's Energy and Water business unit with a dedicated focus on building leading-edge software for the energy sector. OPower specifically has a mission to create utility customer experiences that invite everyone to save energy and decarbonize. I've been with the team for just 3 years now, and prior to joining OPower, I was actually a part of the NEEP team. So excited to be back today. So we can move to the next slide. So with the IRA, there's a lot of pressure on states and contractors to implement these programs in an effective and efficient and cost-effective way. Utility data is crucial to each step in this process. And as we've heard, DOE is really encouraging states to put together utility data access plans and bring the utility into this process. So if you go forward, without this data, I think it is important to set the context of gaps that we'll see in the program implementation without successful access to utility data. So without this, there are a lot of hurdles that we'll have to get over, from fulfilling those program and legal requirements that DOE sets out, including usage data for the modeled and measured approaches. It'd be more challenging to locate the right customers that are eligible, determining those home eligibility requirements, and verifying income. So really, without utility data, there are going to be a lot of gaps, and this will leave states with more inefficient and ineffective programs. And hopefully, with utility data access, we can help close those gaps. So utilities have the data to help find and engage customers and verify that performance. On the right side of the screen, you'll see some of the IRA program data requirements that are being asked of utilities. But in addition to these metrics, there's still a lot of data available that can really help make IRA program implementation the best that it can be. So you'll see here a few different examples of the types of data that is available, including utility data sets. And this can range from the usage data required to rate codes that customers are on, customer profiles, and billing information. This data can be layered with third-party data sets that can really help narrow down and get into the segmentation of customer data, such as weather, parcel data, and demographics. And then there's also customer provided data that utilities have. And this can come from home energy assessments and utility web engagement. So when you get online to pay your bills and interact with your home energy usage on your website, that's additional data that utilities can leverage and share with states. All of this data can be used in modeling with data science and artificial intelligence to create data that can better help identify and engage the right customers for IRA programs, such as some of like the OPower created data that you see in the bottom of the screen. And this includes disaggregated energy insights, load archetype, so how your energy load looks in your home throughout the day, whether you work from home, you go into an office, what have you. If you stay up late at night, that's what a load archetype would show us. Household energy burden and then program propensity are also other types of data that can be created by layering all these together. So if you go to the next slide, there are multiple options available for data sharing between states, utilities, and third parties. And I do just want to note SEO on the slide is our acronym for State Energy Office. I just want to clarify that because you'll see it a lot on some of these slides. So data flows between these three parties can be adapted based on the desired division of labor between a utility and state energy offices. So for instance, there are lots of options for data exchange, such as a utility providing all the premise attributes that are required for IRA programs, and then having the state do their desired analytics with that data. Utilities can provide those premise attributes, but then also layer on some of those advanced insights that we highlighted for all of the customers. And this is, again, putting some more of that analytics requirement to do some of the outreach and education on the state. There's also the option to have the utility do some of that analytics ahead of time if the state is really focused on certain customer segments for targeting IRA programs, such as low-income customers, certain communities, disadvantaged communities and whatnot. If they want certain customer segments, the utility can provide that data for those targeted customers. And states may elect to use Green Button Connect, and that is something that DOE specifically highlighted in their guidelines for individual data sharing to third parties, such as contractors that are involved in the IRA, once the customer has opted in to enroll. On the other hand, bulk data transfers to help enable this customer-centric outreach and education, and as well as providing things like a one-stop shop that we've heard lots of states talk about, that requires something more than just Green Button Connect, because Green Button Connect is really that individual data sharing between a customer and the third party. And this is where platforms such as O-Powers can come into play to help with that connection between the utility and the state. And then one thing that I think is really important, it's at the bottom of the table here, of utility tracking of participants in IRA programs. It's critically important that regardless of the division of labor between utility and states and how data flows, there has to be a two-way flow of that data. So that way, if the states are implementing programs, if they have an implementer working on their behalf, anything that gets installed in a home or any updated home energy assessment that comes out of IRA programs, that data really should be sent back to the utility as well. So the utility is aware and can accommodate based on like their energy efficiency programs and outreach that they have with their customers, as well as for system reliability. Understanding what's happening behind the meter with electrification is really important for utility system planning. And so having that two-way of data flow is one thing that we really recommend in putting together these data access plans. And go to the next slide. There really is a lot of value in what the utility can provide to the state as far as supporting IRA programs. We have a whole list here, but some that I want to highlight include helping identify the customers who benefit from these programs the most, to capturing that customer authorization for data sharing with the state and third parties working on their behalf, as well as performing the marketing, education, and outreach to get customers to enroll in these programs and increase awareness. So if you go to the next slide, successfully finding, reaching, and removing those barriers to enrollment is really important to the IRA goals. Educating the customer with personalized information is critical to ensuring customer protection and program adoption. While the DOE requirements for consumer education are fairly light, we do think it's really important to bring that in and collaborate your education and outreach plans alongside the utility data access plans. And having utility partnerships could really help reduce the burden on the state and its implementers from needing to get utility customer data without their consent for purposes of identification and outreach. So I want to dive into an example of how this can be done with utility data. So we've seen this slide, we've seen all the different types of data available, how that data can flow and move around between the different entities. And this data gets ingested from multiple sources, including from utilities, and can be layered to help find those high likelihood customers that would benefit from the rebate programs. So if you go to the next slide, layering these data sets is where states can really tailor IRA program implementation towards specific customer segments and identify customers that may benefit most. So for instance, you'll see here the different types of customer attributes that we can identify by layering these different data sets, such as whether you're a homeowner or you're a renter, if you have an older home that has high heating costs or usage, customers that have historically not participated in energy efficiency programs before. And having this information and having that individualized customer attribute is what we can use to then tailor individualized messaging to the customer. So to get to the how to reach customers with that data, one thing that we often do is send personalized communications across different channels that matter to customers, such as through their cell phone or email, and alert them of these program offerings. This can happen during moments that matter. And those moments that matter can be things such as an affordability alert, a high usage alert, a weekly energy insight. So really sending those personalized outbound communications to grab that customer's attention and get them to take action, and ensuring that communication has their personalized information is really what can get them to drive action and move to the next step. So from here, customers are sent a mini survey that can help gather information about them, such as common program eligibility questions. And then from there, Braiding funds will really require getting customers to know about the different offerings that are available. So homes and HERA, and then any other state or utility programs that the state is interested in braiding together. So providing a savings hub, showing those various programs in one place is a way to introduce those customers to those programs and show them how they can work together. And then having that individualized curated list showing like, oh, you might benefit most from this program, and then kind of from there go down to ones that have less benefits. And finally, providing easy access to enrollment once you show those programs to customers is also important. So providing the list of required documentation so they're prepared when they go to apply, and then sending them directly to that application page. So this is just one example of how the data can be used to do the identify, engage, enroll, getting people into that funnel with the IRA programs. And so I will stop there and I think pass it back to Luke or over to Colleen.
Yeah, let's go right to Colleen. Take it away.
Great. Thanks, Nick and Luke and Sam. It's great to follow this. I'm Colleen Morris, Calico Energy CEO. Calico is a company that's been working with utilities for a long time to solve data problems, specifically around building level data sets, which is the lens I'm bringing to this conversation. So Sam just spoke to customer level data and attributes and the strategic value of unlocking and leveraging the data set that lives in the utility databases. I'm going to kind of layer on a building level container to a lot of those same nuances. So if you go to the next slide, if you think of this building level lens, whole building consumption data has always been critically necessary, but it's increasingly a dependency or a prerequisite for things like a lot of the IRA programs that we're talking about today. I also have learned over years having conversations about this topic that it can often be overlooked or at a minimum sort of misunderstood. I frequently call this my invisible elephant in the room. So, you know, in addition to federal incentives and IRA drivers, Luke mentioned benchmarking as something that is a piece of a successful state level approach to unlocking and leveraging this data. I would say, you know, benchmarking, I sort of genericize that into building level energy policies because we're seeing a lot of evolution in those policies, and we're talking about things like building energy performance standards. So the policies themselves have been evolving over the last 15, 20 years, and the frequency of their occurrence is going up. So data accuracy and data access is a dependency for initiatives like those. And if you look to some of the precedent in the market and some of the successful deployments that we've seen with utilities, that can also be a driver that sort of produces a new approach to accessing and using this data. Certainly the federal incentives, many of those that are, you know, sort of tied to or embedded in the IRA, like 179D, a lot of HUD's programming and funding, and then the entire home efficiency rebate program is also another example. Specifically, when you think of the rebate programming in the IRA, this building level view becomes critically important to leverage that funding for multifamily properties. We also obviously are here driven by the IRA impetus, and I think that you know, I want to point to within the link to the DOE's published guidelines that were shared in the chat a little bit ago. I think it's on the 4th page. There is sort of another crumb there that links to the EPA's guidance on building level data access, which is explicitly included in the IRA as programming and also in the DOE's directives and suggestions for states around the type of data that we need to be able to use. And then certainly in NEEP's territory, there are a few other examples of states who've been wrestling with this, prior to the IRA and separate from either benchmarking or building energy performance standards. So, New Hampshire and Maine and New York all have sort of their own multi-year processes in different stages for providing access to energy data at the state level. And each of those, to my most recent best knowledge, also include specifically building level data access. If you hop to the next slide for me. There we go. So the reason that this is not all one conversation, that Sam and I are both kind of bringing our separate lenses to this, is because, while utilities hold all of the data necessary to do this, there's a bit of a structural or utility business model issue when it comes to, readily generating and accessing building level views. So the utility business model, if you think about that, and the way that their data systems are built is very, very customer focused for all the right reasons. Who's going to pay this bill, who owns the account, which meters are tied to that account. If you look at the 3 sort of gray boxes in the center of this slide, though, and you think about certain building types, depending on whether you're talking about electricity or gas or water, the prevalence of this issue varies. But in any situation where individual account holders are paying their own bill within a building, which is most common for electric, but relevant potentially for all, to the utility, those are separate customers. So when you're looking to identify or access buildings and building level data to bring them into some of these programs, that creates a layer of distance between the readily available data and building level views. So on the far sides, homeowners who live or who own or rent their own properties have at least a starting point on their bills. Same thing for sort of a single owner or tenant occupied commercial structure. But in the center, utilities and their stakeholders have to do some work to generate that building level view, particularly in the middle. And those of you that work with utilities are somewhat familiar with this problem. I know you'll recognize what I'm about to say, but when you've mixed together commercial and residential customer types, that's sort of the hardest of the complexities here, because often utilities have completely separate customer information systems or separate teams and processes for commercial customer data and residential customer data. This is by no means a prohibitive issue, but I call it my invisible elephant because when we're talking about building level views and data and leveraging those strategically, this is a problem that people need to understand so that all stakeholders can come together to solve it. Next slide, please. So if a utility is working with their regulators or their states or their implementation contractors or all of the above, which is ideal, there are a number of different considerations that we have seen come into their decision-making process around how they might implement a solution to this. Over time, I've seen many utilities sort of take a progressive or a phased approach to how they deal with this. When you're talking about hundreds of buildings who may be reaching out to a utility, may be driven by a sort of high square footage benchmarking policy, or maybe something even like a 2030 district that's sort of driving building owners and operators in their territory to look for this data so that they can leverage it. Oftentimes the utility's first approach will be something manual to sort of creating and delivering that data. So think like form-based approach, data being emailed. That is definitely better than not getting the data, but often you see that over time as the increase in requests go up and the importance and accuracy and sort of recurring access to data is emphasized, that utilities will eventually make a choice to start to automate pieces and eventually the entirety of the process. Another decision that utilities often end up wrestling with is whether they might build their own solution or buy a solution or some combination of the two. This can have a big effect on how long it takes to implement or evolve those solutions. It also has a large effect on who does the work to sort of keep these deployments or these tools up to date as ordinances and buildings who are participating and the dots being connected across state energy offices and state programming with utility programming get larger and more complicated. So also, I have seen utilities, sort of in their evaluation of building versus buying, if they decide to buy, some utilities will choose to build a custom solution, which can be the right approach depending on their systems and what they're trying to accomplish. Certainly, there are more than one products in the market that utilities can purchase or select as well to help them make that decision. Calico is one of those. So the last bullet here is sort of again reference to the 3 buildings in the middle of my prior slide. We have seen utilities over time build solutions and deploy them to serve buildings who, for one reason or another, have been mandated to access their data and leverage it for something like compliance with a building energy performance standard or a benchmarking law or ordinance. Now what is starting to happen is there are a lot of so many reasons, including leveraging IRA funding, that buildings might be looking for that data, that utilities are realizing it's a little bit of a field of dreams situation. Like if you build a solution that gives people access to this data, people will come look to use it, and utilities themselves are sort of opening up a lot of those tools and programs so that the entire population of buildings they serve has access to them. That wasn't always the case for many utilities, though. And then the last bullet here is just kind of a restatement of that mixed-use building profile. I have seen that oftentimes with utilities, the sort of commercial label is interpreted to mean commercial customers. But of course, on this call today, talking about the IRA, we're actually talking most predominantly about multifamily structures, which are full of residential customers. So that's another nuance that utilities need to kind of be able to bring into the way they solve for this data need. And then if you go to my last slide. So if you're thinking about how to bring together the right people, leverage utility data, and sort of ensure that we have reliable, regular access to machine readable data that can be connected and used by third parties. Certainly connection to portfolio manager is often a part of these solution deployments. These are the different things that I think we all need to be cognizant of. The first one is, again, my invisible elephant analogy that, this is not just a case of utilities having data and needing to provide access to it. There is work that needs to be done to produce an accurate building level data set. The sort of second bullet here reiterates that, but if you're looking for more detail, I know when we get to the Q&A, we can talk more about some of the nuances of why that's challenging. The one I'd like to highlight from this slide is that often the folks who are asking for building level data are not even a customer in the building, which if you think of a typical utility sort of my account or customer portal, that's often authenticated based on the account holder status of the person requesting information, who has obviously a right to see it and authorize the sharing of it. When you layer in a building level lens, you end up with folks like building operators, building managers, third party sort of ESCO and energy management firms who are often filling this role for building owners and operators. And that's a really key part of sort of ensuring access to this data set, is that folks like those have a good, secure, sort of verified, authorizable mechanism for getting their hands on the data. I would also note that as with many parts of the IRA and other funding streams, things like Justice 40, that this is really a good example of why state energy officers and offices and utility regulators need to be sort of working and collaborating on this. Key part of that for utilities can be that if the regulators are involved, then clear guidelines for cost recovery and the investment that may be necessary sort of come with the territory. And then the last bullet here sort of speaks to the first slide again, which is that there are a lot of different drivers that can lead to a utility looking to solve for this. It's also important to understand that if a utility is dealing with sort of a situation like in Massachusetts, in NEEP's territory, where you have, Boston level, city level ordinances and directives, and, sort of new state level guidance, that utilities are juggling different requirements and subtleties of some of those. So everybody needs to zoom out enough to ensure that the solutions deployed will meet the needs of all of those. I think that can be it until we head to Q&A. Thanks, Luke.
Awesome. Well, thank you both, Samantha and Colleen. It's great to hear you both and hear about two different solutions to similar problems, but kind of different lenses of the same issue. Let's start up our Q&A section here. We have one question in the chat from Andy. It looks like it's for Colleen. Andy says, what is the first step for a community who wants to implement benchmarking or building performance standards in a utility territory that does not offer aggregated whole building data? How do we get utilities to start implementing solutions?
I mean, I guess my first answer would be that the very, very first step is to get all the right people into a room together, and that without a utility there, all the right people aren't there yet. So that may be an oversimplified response, but I think that those types of, true multifaceted conversations are what I have seen drive both expedience and success when it comes to implementing these types of initiatives. I also think a key distinction there would be, if you're taking sort of a city level approach, that tends to be able to be something that can move a bit faster than some of the sort of state level examples we've seen. And so in those cases, it's particularly important to bring the utilities who are relevant, to the table from the beginning, because they can be impacted pretty quickly. And we've seen examples of places where the policy is passed and it takes a little while for utilities to catch up. So I may sound a little bit like a broken record, but I do think that's the key to getting there from the start.
Thank you. All right. Everyone, please, if you do have any questions, we have this Q&A function down. It's separate from the normal chat. Just throw your questions in there. We will see it and we'll get to it. In the meantime, I've got some questions I have drafted up here. I'll pitch one to Samantha. So we've had a lot of discussions around states maybe discussing one-stop shops for IRA programs around data access and implementation of these programs. How do you think states would benefit from working with utilities and leveraging their utility data to deploy this type of project?
That's a great question. So we've seen, I think, a lot of states starting to say reacting to IRA and already having state programs such as IHEAP or weatherization, and then utility programs. I feel like IRA's kind of like bubbled the pot a little bit, and now there's so many programs out there. And so helping customers navigate that, understand what's available to them. The one-stop shop is an option of bringing everything together, especially in the sense of rating programs. So it's much easier for customers to navigate. But if you have that as a standalone state website or state one-stop shop, getting people to go to it will be a challenge. And so by working with the utility and leveraging that data, either having a utility partnership where the utility is sending that outbound communication to customers, like I provided the example of, getting them to go to that one-stop shop, I think is really helpful just to get awareness and increase that over time by adding in utility data and those individualized customer attributes. You can even start to pre-populate some of the information for the customer so that they don't have to go into it and provide everything all at once. And so things like what you get from those home energy assessments or utility usage data, having that type of information, partnering with the utility to pre-populate some of that into the survey or however it is that you're trying to get the person into that to see the programs they're eligible for. It can help streamline the process. And I think what's really important about it is showing customers what they may actually be eligible for based on their personal data that they're providing or that the utility has. Because sometimes when you have a standalone calculator or one-stop shop that's more based on just like the program requirements, it may present in a way that's like, oh, you might be eligible for this. Here's some criteria that you're going to have to check. And then that people drop off at that point because they're like, oh, I don't know. I don't want to like go pull up that information. But if you already have it and you're saying, oh, no, we're pretty sure you're going to be eligible for this. And based on like your attributes, we think this is the level of the rebate you might get from that as well. That'll really encourage people to take the next step and be like, okay, yeah, like that makes sense. I'll go and look at the application process now. So I think outbound is helpful. And then, yeah, the data to help pre-populate some of the information too.
Perfect. It looks like we've got another question that will be headed your way, Samantha, from Liz in the chat here. Liz is asking, can you talk a little about Green Button? What is it and how do utilities use that? How prevalent is it in the utility landscape? And what should SEOs know about it when designing rebate programs?
Yeah, so Green Button Connect is a way to share for customers to access their own data, but then also to share data with third parties. So there are two pieces to it. There's Green Button Download, and a lot of utilities that have web engagement solutions for home energy use analysis and things like that incorporate Green Button Download in those web portals. And it's basically like literally what it sounds like. It's a way to download an Excel file of your data. Green Button Connect is the next step as far as like customers sharing their data with third parties. So it's an opt-in process for sharing your individual level data with third parties. So with contractors or others that may be a part of implementing the rebate programs. I would say that Green Button Download is much more prevalent than Green Button Connect in many states. It is a process to get it set up, and there is a cost associated with it. There's time, and so I think it's definitely one option. It's something that DOE has encouraged in their guidelines, and I think that there's maybe around like I think I can think of 10 states off the top of my head that have it, that definitely have Green Button Download. Some of them may have Green Button Connect. You'll see a lot with like grid modernization proceedings. So like a lot of New England states, like Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and others that have had recent advanced metering infrastructure approvals go through, they incorporate Green Button Connect as a part of the customer engagement plan. And so you'll see deployment in that sense. And there are definitely ways to help make access to that easier. And I know the OPower platform helps initiate that transfer of data for Green Button Connect with the utilities that we work with. So it's definitely, I think, a great option for the third party data sharing, but it does take time to set up. So that's my warning around that.
Awesome, thank you. Colleen, I know you have interactions with Green Button things as well. Do you have anything additional you would want to add to that, or did we kind of cover it?
I think the only sentence would be sort of a +1 on Sam's last comment there, which is that it's similar to any other sort of utility-enabled data access approach, really understanding where it is today, because there is a big distinction there. And I know a number of utilities who have some degree of third-party connection enablement, but it's still not any third party anywhere, right? There's sort of a two-way street there in terms of building those pipes and really being able to leverage it. So I think it's definitely something state energy offices should be looking at in response to this directive and guidance from the DOE. But sort of saying that would be the approach is just the first step to then like supporting the actual enablement and delivery of it, similar to every other thing we're talking about.
Yeah, and I guess I want to add one more distinction too, is that so Green Button Connect is really an individual customer opting in to share their individual data, which is important for the usage data for the measured and modeled approaches to qualify for the rebates. As far as the secondary purpose of using customer data and the utility data access plans around marketing and education, that's really where like the bulk transfer of data is necessary, of either getting the attributes for all customers or targeted segments. And I had kind of talked through that a little bit in the presentation, but there are 2 different levels of data transfer that are recommended, I think, for data access around the IRA.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you both. We've got one question in the chat here from Erin. Colleen, I think this is sort of more pointed your way. Can energy data help utilities or implementers design future programs or programs for hard to reach markets like LMI, low to moderate income, or multifamily?
Yes, definitely. You know, and I think, I mean, really a lot of what Samantha spoke to, you know, sort of addresses that as well, where one of the analogies I use, sometimes people on my team are going to roll their eyes right now, but I call it like fishing with fish radar versus like throwing a line into the ocean and being like, ooh, someone bit my fishing line, right? So there's this notion of like actually looking at a landscape and using sort of targeting and filtering to sort of identify and really address not just, you know, customers in a certain location, in a certain building type, but also layering on attributes like who has the highest bill, or which buildings are, you know, the lowest performing when it comes to something like an Energy Star score or highest EUI, right? Like the more lenses you can combine to being, you know, proactive about your target goals and your population and where you are, you know, the more strategically you're leveraging things. And that sort of fishing radar analogy there is I think also what we're speaking to, where there's can one person get their data to maximize their rebate? That's an important use case, and that's really critical. The other use case is, are we being like holistically strategic about the entire population we're trying to serve, and like really meaningfully maximizing all of this capital in a way that delivers on all the targets we're looking for? And I don't think you can do that without having fishing radar and really looking at the whole picture. So, you know, a resounding yes to Erin's question, and also like the complexity that we're highlighting is it really does kind of take inputs from multiple sources and, you know, the technical ability to combine that to successfully deliver.
Nice. All right. We have one more question here in the chat. This question is from Bill, and he says, how are these efforts being coordinated with, for example, manufacturers, distributors, retailers, and contractors, the value chain? This is the value chain that's selling solutions and needs to be part of the data loop, and especially for the point of sale efforts, as an example. I'll let whoever wants to start can jump in first with this one.
Yeah, I think that this kind of gets into data sharing and consent levels with that. So you have data sharing between the utility to the state, and then the utility or the state to then those third parties. I think this is where Green Button Connect is a great example of how to do that, of a customer saying, yes, I want to participate in this program, and then having a way to get that data to those third parties. Green Button Connect is one way. There are, you know, lots of data solutions available. You know, OPower offers like integrations between utility and third parties to help make that easier and more feasible from the individual customer to those third parties. So I think there are options there. I think you know, utilities are definitely risk adverse and anti taking on lots of liability, and there are definitely reasons for that. And so I think when setting up utility data access plans, considering like where the liability of that data falls as well, when it's being transferred between different entities, leaving the utility to the state, and then from the state going to those third parties, who's liable for the data at that point, and taking some of the risk off the utility as well, I think will help make that a little easier to set up between all the different parties that are interested in the data. But definitely having the security around it is really important too.
Right, thank you. Colleen, anything to add to that, or we can go on to the next question if you'd like.
Yeah, we could talk about that for an hour, but we can always circle back if we run out of questions, I think.
Perfect. We have one more in the chat from Yurin. She's asking, can you talk about the major barriers you're seeing in enabling data access, and with which stakeholders are you facing these barriers? We can start with you, Colleen, and then Sam, we can jump to you after.
I mean, I think that, you know, if you, again, if we're talking about sort of access to a complete picture and a whole data set, a lot of this is fairly unprecedented in a number of ways, you know. So you've sort of got, you know, utilities running businesses for lots and lots of decades a certain way with sort of key, you know, key business processes in place that have been in place for a very long time. And we have, you know, state energy offices trying to sort of define and iterate and strategize and deploy an unprecedented amount of federal money. And a lot of this is very new. So in my mind, the newness of a lot of those use cases and a lot of the things that we're describing as necessary is probably the biggest barrier. There are examples in terms of precedent, you know, driven by a benchmarking policy or a BEPS policy. And I think we need to be really careful to zoom out enough to recognize and leverage those precedents and examples, even though the drivers for the operational solution are something a little bit different. The sort of technical solutions aren't that different. We just need to kind of take them to the next level. So, you know, from my view, the sort of newness and scale are what has everybody pausing and going, hang on, you know. And when you talk about the newness, you're certainly talking about, you know, multi-stakeholder collaborations across large state entities and with a large enterprise, you know, player like utilities who have their own regulatory body. So to answer the sort of second part of that question, which I'm going to add, which is like, you know, which stakeholders are facing them and how do we like cross these barriers as quickly as possible? I do think there's a triangulation there between like state energy offices, utility regulators, and utilities themselves. And the quicker we sort of connect those dots state by state, the more success we'll have at really working together on whatever the barrier might be. Because from one state to another, a lot of the status of this is pretty different. There are places where utilities have good technical solutions in place and they just need to scale them. And there are other states where there's not a solution to, you know, maybe Green Button isn't deployed, and certainly there's the third party share is not live, and definitely there's not building level data access. So I do think it would be amiss to not highlight that state by state or region by region, there's still a wide diversity in what is going on just in NEEP's territory.
Yeah, thank you. And Samantha, anything else to add to that as well?
Well, I think I would plus one to Colleen's point about the different entities. And that was something that was going to be one of my main points as well, as far as barriers, as you have utilities, which are regulated entities, they respond to a commission. And then you have states and state energy offices driving certain policy goals, and how to bring them together, how to get them to collaborate, I think is one of the biggest challenges. And I think that is potentially what the DOE is trying to help push the conversation on with the utility data access plan, because this has been a barrier for a long time. It's not new at all. And so pushing the conversation with this utility data access plan, I think is a great first step. having conversations like this, and then getting state energy offices and their regulators to talk and figure out what is feasible. I know we've seen some states take the approach of doing a statewide database in the NEEP region. I think that's one option that is also like a very expensive, time-consuming option. And there are other pathways I think that states can consider as far as like trying to stand something up for the IRA in a reasonable time frame that may not be as costly to them as well. So I think there's definitely some room for innovation. And as Colleen said, it's very new. And so getting everyone together to come up with these new ideas, I think, is probably the first step to overcoming it.
All right, thank you both. We don't have any questions in the chat right now, so I will throw one out here that I had thought of in getting ready for this. More towards Colleen, are there any kind of promising solutions for some of the initial upfront costs associated with technical solutions for this kind of rollout? This is definitely one of the biggest considerations for rolling out such programs at scale. Like you said, even though there is an unprecedented amount of funding, it's still, of course, at the top of everybody's mind. So,
yeah, two specific examples. When Colorado passed their building energy performance standard, they did engage utility stakeholders early enough to hear about the sort of cost and technical solution implications of that legislation. And as a result, they incorporated some amount of like funding and support for utilities into their programming. That was like part of the design. And I think there are some key considerations around size of utility attached to some of that and what type of support the state is offering. That's one example. Crystal, who runs that program at the state level, I know is always happy to talk to anybody about it. Another different approach is that, when New Jersey passed their benchmarking directive, the utility regulators were actually tasked with implementing it. So part of the language that came out of the BPU in New Jersey was really clear guidance around both expectations for utility support and also a mechanism for cost recovery. So, while New Jersey's policy is, benchmarking specific, it's not, benchmarking, or it's not building performance and carbon, they did a really, in my opinion, pretty savvy thing from the beginning, which was just roll the data access in and kind of address a lot of the utility challenges or things that come up later sometimes for utilities right out of the gate, including a mechanism for what they could recover. And as a result, the large utilities in New Jersey were able to stand up solutions in less than a year because they were given a directive and a means to pay for it.
Awesome. All right. And we have just a couple minutes left, Samantha. I'll let you, if you want to chime in on that one as well, but no sweat if we kind of covered it.
I think Colleen covered it really well. Cost recovery was going to be what I was going to add to that. And I think it goes back to the point of getting states and regulators to talk to each other so that regulators can provide those directives and down to the utility. So kind of like stepping back to that, getting that conversation started in your states between the state energy office and regulators and figuring out what are those regulatory directives that are needed to enable these solutions.
Might be the punchline, Luke.
Right.
That seems like it, really. All right. Well, with that, that's a good note to end on, I think. Thank you both, Colleen and Samantha, for joining us today. And thanks everybody for attending our Ready, Set, Scale webinar for this month. And I hope it was good enough to bring you back for the next one. And yeah, thank you again to our allies network, to our funders, and to our participants, Calico Energy and O-Power. And yeah, thank you, everybody. We'll see you at our next webinar.
Thanks all.
Thank you.